Thank you all for joining me on a journey into the depths of prehistory. This is a prehistoric cyclopean or polygonal masonry wall. It's in Cusco, Peru. As cryptic and baffling as these random stone assemblies, Thomas, thank you for sharing that last image, by the way. They're baffling to us today, and yet there's a really key concept that we need to understand about these walls. Because no one set out to design this wall in the way that we think of design today. The stones were not quarried and prefabricated. These walls were carefully selected and cannibalized from previous incarnations of the same wall. So what we've been doing as a research group is studying these walls, looking at the archaeological evidence, studying their details, and essentially decoding and breaking down the systemic logics with which this reassembly can occur. And we compiled that together into the next book that's going to land on your bookshelf, which is the Cannibal's Cookbook. And if you're interested in why I'm saying cannibalism instead of, say, recycling or reuse, or the very PC-friendly circularity, please ask me. I'd love to talk about cannibalism. But the thing that I really want to put forward here is that the patterns of these walls were never drawn out, right? The way that we think about the designs today, we will freeze a design. I think that was mentioned earlier with Mariana's presentation. The character of these walls emerged because of finite resources, particular tools and techniques which are outlined in the book, and also, very important to this audience, and I'm happy to see so much of the work that's happening in this group, an appetite and a cultural appreciation for the reuse of previous building materials. So here's one of the recipes that you can find in the book. This is the recipe that produced that wall that I showed you at Sacsayhuaman. You can follow the sequential logics of this and produce walls of your own, but first, you don't need to make a drawing. You really need a supply of random rubble. So we used offcuts from the stone industry and some broken up slabs from demolished Motel 6s in Madison, Wisconsin. We scanned that rubble, we inventoried it, and then we used a translation, our digital translation of that Inca algorithm to produce this wall. The thing that I want to identify about this is that in order to build smarter practices for the future, we're going to have to rethink the roles with which design engages. What is and is not to be included in our design process? I think this is the contribution that this community is making right now by expanding beyond simply representations of architectural intent. So I'm very happy to be here. I just want to return to this. I talk about big old stones all the time. We're going to be talking about this wall today. One of the things that we learned from this exploration by trying to replicate this process is that by shifting your attention away from a pre-designed strategy and towards circularity, you drop so many of the preconceived ideas that we've inherited from the industrial era. Material efficiency is not here. That does not exist. And you place your energy into other categories of search algorithms. So if you put yourself in the shoes of a cyclopean mason, you're going to have a hole in the wall, and you need to fill that hole with some random rubble that's surrounding you. So you spend a lot of time searching for the largest possible stone that fits the shape, that you have to do the least amount of carving to set. And you accept, as part of that premise, as that exchange, the value exchange, you accept you're going to have to move that big stone. So you only want to move it one time. So that explains why these cyclopean walls get so large and gargantuan, but it doesn't answer the question of how those giant stones were moved by mere mortals. This is an infamous image of the revered Moai of Rapa Nui, or Easter Island. Now, this is an image of the quarry. So this is the source location with which these moai emerge from the earth. But this is an image of the final resting position on one of the many Ahu platforms that encircle this tiny island in the Pacific. Okay, so from a Western point of view, we think of these as statues. We analyze them for their figurations, their placement, and we wonder at the idea that there was some artist or some creator who took the time to establish these permanent fixtures throughout eternity to convey some kind of meaning. But to apply that Western logic would be a fallacy. Because when the Dutch explorers first encountered the island, they asked the people of Rapa Nui how their ancestors could have possibly moved those massive stones. And the Rapa Nui told them, our ancestors did not move those stones. They said the stones walked themselves. And obviously, for centuries, this was dismissed as stone worship. But it turns out they were telling the truth. There's a word called neke neke, which is to walk with your legs bound together. So the moai were transported standing, pivoting from side to side. So as spectacular as the moai are as static, statuary objects for Western tourists today, what we have to do is imagine being there then, at that moment, with colossal moai marching around the island. Because the real memorial was not the object itself and the material, it was the cultural act of bringing a stone to life. I would say this is admittedly, a mindset that probably sits outside of conventional logics of construction, but what I've been doing is challenging myself with this very ancient but straightforward challenge of putting on public performances of the dumb problem of moving and standing big, heavy stones. Like this 16-foot-tall statue that walks horizontally across land and stands under the incredibly limited strength of a handful of my graduate students at MIT. Or this floating stone that swims horizontally under the low bridges and then drinks the river water to find a new state of equilibrium to stand vertically. Or this 4,000-pound behemoth designed to spring itself out of its own formwork to dance on stage. So these are fun tests. I've been doing this over and over again, this megalithic challenge of moving big stones from quarry to site, standing them vertically. And in doing that, you get to engage in some fun activities of realizing the perception of life in these objects, but we're also very interested in how humans engage with these inorganic beings. So let's just return to our touchstone for a moment, because this spectacular piece of architecture is first composed out of the recycled and cannibalized structures of its past. Second, it's transported with carbohydrate labor, we shall say. And then, finally, it takes the stakes beyond thinking of like single objects, moai or obelisks, into the logics of construction and assembly. So more recently, we've been challenging ourselves with the task of embedding the behavior of assembly and kinetics into the objects themselves. And in folding in these other dynamics of construction, we're grappling with ideas. This is supposed to be a video, but imagine they're colliding with each other and nesting in a really elegant and beautiful way. But Patty comes over and slams into Jan. Jan comes up and nestles perfectly with Patty. We're really trying to grapple with conflating ideas of practical notions of assembly with more spiritual ideas of ritual and theatricality and performing arts. So if we think about construction through a very narrow bandwidth of efficiency, we can appreciate that a brick is designed for a mason to be able to pick and place all day long. But walking assembly operates in an entirely different paradigm because you would never pick up and place one of these giant stones. Instead, the construction worker applies slow and steady pressure to guide the elements in a way that they also want to behave. So there's a feedback loop, and it transforms a way of thinking about construction away from labor and to start to think about this as a dance. This is the temporal idea. This came up yesterday. Jeanette mentioned an idea of the fourth dimension being missing from architecture. We're so fixated on the third dimension. And I think temporality is making its way into the global consciousness of this community. This exercise for us has been helpful in thinking about different timelines of architecture because as these elements are relatively easy to put together, they're equally easy to disassemble and remantle in different configurations. So in summary, we live in a world where climate is transformed, resources are scarce, and we need to think about labor in dramatically different ways. And if we continue to perpetuate blindly the values that we've inherited from industrialization, we would be challenged to find alternative approaches. So that's what I've dedicated my career to doing, is taking on these explorations, whether they're applicable or not. Think of me as a conceptual artist, educated as an architect. But what I've found here is that in order to build simple, elegant solutions only appear simple. They are not simple. But you're displacing complexity from one area to another. And through that displacement, what you tend to do is put that somewhere that appears extra-disciplinary and not within the mindsets with which we evaluate architecture, particularly from a Western mindset. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.